According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, only 0.07% of Wisconsin farmers are Black. That's less than 1%. Where our food comes from and who has access to it can have a huge impact on the health of a community. On this episode of Why Race Matters, we'll chat with a Black farmer who spent most of their life battling food insecurity within the Black community. We'll also discuss land access and other barriers that prevent Black people from farming. But first, let's dig a little deeper and explore why race matters when it comes to our food. The story of Black farmers throughout history is one of strength, loss, and resilience. In Wisconsin, that story might be best represented by Pleasant Ridge, a community of Black farmers founded in 1850 by Charles Shepherd, a freedman from Virginia. The community was a refuge for escaped slaves and sat on land in Grant County, Wisconsin. In 1863, the emancipation of slavery came with the promise of 40 acres and a mule. The program intended to help freedmen and women find their way after slavery, but was later revoked by President Andrew Johnson. Today, there are only 62 Black farmers out of more than 88,000 producers statewide. In 1910, Black farmers owned more than 16 million acres of farmland nationwide. That's compared to 2.5 million acres in 2017. It's a major loss of land that several studies have linked back to systemic injustices involving lending practices and access to federal resources. The landmark class action lawsuit, Pickford versus Glickman, sought to shed light on the injustice and relieve Black farmers who were discriminated against by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. In spite of these barriers, the work of Black farmers today persists as an act of social justice. Not only do Black farmers help to maintain traditional agricultural practices, they also help to increase access to healthy, natural, and affordable foods within their communities. For urban farmer and longtime Madison resident Robert Pierce, farming is a source of liberation, a way to pay homage to the past and create a path to a more equitable future. So thank you for joining me today, Mr. Pierce.
Thank you for letting me join you.
Of course. So can you tell us your story and what has brought you into the world of farming? If that's a simple story to tell.
Well, it's not that simple.
Okay.
But I'll simplify it. I came back from Vietnam, became allergic to a lot of stuff that was in food. At that point, I didn't know what was going on. I just knew that I was eating stuff, getting sick. Had to go and get these shots from the hospital and stuff like that. So, and I had decided I was going to grow food, after service, I mean, when I was a kid, my thing was my grandmother sent me to all these elderly people to help them clean their gardens or pick their vegetables for them and stuff. So I was always in someone's gardens, so it wasn't, natural for me to do this, I mean, I always did it, but I also noticed when I got back from the service how the elderly, their health was depleting, and one of the reasons were we were the first McDonald's in Madison. It was on South Madison.
So you mean the Black community had the first McDonald's.
Now, how the heck could you beat a 25-cent cheeseburger? Come on now. And 10-cent fries? Come on. $1 you could get full.
That's true.
And they had stopped eating and growing, they stopped growing food and stopped, cooking meals and stuff because they could always spend $1 and feed, $5 going to feed a whole family, quick, And so I noticed their health, started to deplete. And so when I took on this venture, it was one of the things I seen, that their health and, was depleting. They weren't eating like we were when we grew up, So that's why I started, doing the ethnic greens and, stuff like that, to make sure that they were getting the things that, that we knew, that we grew up with.
But up until that point, was this still like a family, more of a home venture? Like it wasn't a business in the sense, or at that point had it
Well, I had,
expanded to?
I was in a business college, so it's some, I was turned it into a business. Yes,
Hmm.
I did the old, going to the neighborhoods and taking it to people's houses and parking my, an old Wrangler truck on, on corners and stuff, and go to somebody's house. They say, oh, so and so down the street wants you to come by there, and we did the farmers market down in the square, and I was like single parent with 4 kids, 4 years old, 2, 1, and 3.5 months old.
Oh wow.
They're all of us in the truck, we're selling vegetables. So
Wow.
at some point, it's like we decided that well, it wasn't making enough money up at the farmers market up here, which everybody else was, but I was the only
Mm.
black man up there. So they would look at my stuff but not buy. So it's kind of okay.
Well, what was that even like for you in terms of stepping into an industry that maybe, like you said, people didn't easily associate you with the image, right, that's put in front of us of farming? So, like, how did you once come to see yourself as this, but also navigate other people's perceptions of what a farmer
Well,
was?
I've never really cared what people thought about me. I mean, I do what I. If I decide it's gonna do something, I just do it. Down on the square, they used to name things, because I wasn't. I was, not conventional as they were. We'll put it that way. But I just it was something I seen I wanted to do, and I went after it. It's like I had quit down on the square because I wasn't making any money down there. I just said, forget that. That's a waste of my time. The last straw was I started growing blue potatoes, and there was the guy that now we're getting all this publicity about the farmers market being the largest farmers market in the country.
Right.
And there was a guy from the Chicago Tribune that came by, and he never said who the guy was. He just said, there's a guy at the Madison Farmers Market that grows blue potatoes. We had this rash amount of people that came and they looked at my blue potatoes, but they wouldn't buy them.
Because you were the one that was selling them.
Right. But they looked at them. They wanted to buy 1 or 2 of them, And I'm having, I've got, piles of them, but they wanted to buy 1 or 2 of them to show somebody. And the next year, the young guy that was next to me, he started growing blue potatoes, and they bought out. He sold out. He was buying them from me and selling them, because
Wow.
he already sold his out.
And he probably noticed that people weren't buying from you, so he wanted to
Well, of course,
capitalize. Oh.
yeah. So that was the last try. I said, I don't need this. I mean, right before my face, that type of racism. And so I just said, nah, enough of that.
What was people's initial reaction to you doing something that maybe they were not familiar or accustomed to hearing a black man specifically say he was going to do?
Well, the elderly people loved it
Okay.
because, as I stated before, I used to do that as a kid for them. Now, for my peers, they were like, man, are you crazy? That's hard work, man. Hey, man, you're getting dirty and all this other stuff, And I'm going, yeah, man. So what? They would see me, in the fields working. You hear someone yell out, "Man, that's slavery," and I go, "No, that's money." And they didn't understand, that having land is power. Having growing your own food, where you don't have to answer to anybody,
Right.
is power.
Right. No
They
one can
never,
take that away from you.
yeah, they didn't understand that. I mean,
Hmm.
I could, go ahead and go to my field and get whatever I wanted and go home and eat. I didn't have to, worry about, where my food was coming from because I was growing it. And after years, they You know, some of the people that see me out in the fields, they were going, "You still doing that?" You know, but it was so hard to convince people that what I was doing was the right thing, because it was like they equated it with slavery. The hard work, was like, they didn't realize there was a payout for that hard work,
Right. And that's so interesting because we have been separated from our connection
Well,
to
of
the
course.
land because there was a time when it was forced
Oh,
upon
yeah.
us to do that. And so our possibly attempts of separating ourselves from that part of our history has led us to maybe lose some of that connection that's super important.
And that's
that would be
also
beneficial
another
now.
reason why we've lost so much land, because
Mm,
that land transferred to the next generation. They equated it with slavery, and they equated it with hard work they didn't want to do, or they've seen their parents do, and they weren't going to do that. And they ended up selling that land, and for what it was, for whatever it wasn't worth, it was worth a lot more for them to keep it.
but they just
And
did not want to be bothered.
yeah, didn't want to be bothered with it. So
But do you see a return back to that? Because I follow quite a few young Black homesteaders on Instagram. I'm hearing about this kind of reverse northern migration where Black people in northern cities are now returning back to the South because it's cheaper, warmer weather. So do you think we're going to see somewhat of a reversal of what exactly you described, of us trying to reclaim?
well, I'm hoping that. I just see the article about someone in Georgia where they just got together and bought land,
Mhm.
95 acres. Brought joy to me. I said, "Wow, someone's getting it."
It's happening.
Yes, it's happening. I think it's a great thing. And
Mhm.
I think I'm hoping that it gets to be more prevalent. Because it's like I love to see that in my lifetime, to see where we could be able to have our own communities like we used to, and be prosperous.
I understand you have an interesting story about one young person that you talked to that had a hard time accepting that you were a farmer. Can you tell us about that?
I used to go through the schools and talk to the kids, kindergarten kids, about different vegetables. And there was this young kid that kept staring at me when I walked in. They knew that the farmer was coming. It was kindergarten, and he knew the farmer was coming to the class. And so when I came in, he stared at me, and he just kept staring at me. And so I was talking as I kept talking to the kids and stuff. And at the very end, I says, "Are there any questions?" And this kid throws his hand up and he says, I said to him, "Yes." And he goes, "You ain't no farmer." And I go, "Yes, I am." He said, "No, you're not." And I said, "Well, why am I not? Why am I not a farmer?"
Right.
He said, "Because you're wearing FUBU." So I looked at him. I said, "Well, I'm an urban farmer."
There you go. That is hilarious. So he clearly had an image in his mind
Well,
about
of
what all
course,
farmers look like.
yeah, especially in kindergarten, they give them a book and they see a white farmer with a straw hat and a bib over overalls. know. Nah, no, I don't do that.
Like all farmers don't look like that.
No,
Wow.
no, they don't. I mean, it's like, I guess I crushed his vision of a farmer, but
But maybe in a good way where he's like, oh, I can see myself as a farmer and I don't have to fit this farmer uniform or
yeah,
this stereotype.
now he could go and become a farmer and not have to wear straw hat. But I do have a straw hat.
Like I just didn't bring it today, but that is part of my uniform.
Yeah, I mean, I do have one, but I just don't wear it all the time. All right.
But you mentioned you were an urban farmer. So can you
Yes.
tell me more about that? Because I have heard of folks who even live in like really densely populated cities who consider themselves farmers.
This is a new thing I think, for African Americans, what we can capitalize on, since we don't have land.
So urban farming is an alternative to the typical farming model that requires having all of this land.
Right.
Okay.
So, urban farming, it was teaching people that having the right type of soil, that you can create a profit on a smaller scale, that you don't need all of that land. You can work out of a greenhouse, or you can work on anywhere with the right type of soil. You can grow on it. And I think this is a new norm for, since African Americans don't have land. This is where you can be able to, plant anywhere and grow food, And if we do this as collectively as a group, we could be able to sell those at markets or whatever and be able to make money by doing that. I think the new norm for African American farmers is urban farming.
Mm, I like that. And what, I guess, examples of different crops that you could easily grow even within a small space?
Anything. I mean,
Really?
with the right soil, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. But, I mean, your collards, your spinach, and kale, all these different things you can grow very easily,
Mm.
I mean, out in the fields, I'm doing melons and everything else, but I'm doing them on mounds and stuff out in the fields. But you have to have land for that.
So things just take
But
up more space once they're fully
yeah,
grown.
but if you're just doing stuff in town or in smaller areas, you could be able to, do smaller stuff, like kale and stuff like that, high dollar stuff.
Mhm.
Out of greenhouses, you can be able to do sprouts, which are, 5 to 7 days, and nutritious, and be able to make money with it.
So that is an interesting model. It's like the land access part, not to ignore that conversation, it's still very important, but not to wait for that in order for like the growing to take place. I like that. I may have to do some Googling, figure out how I can do that on my small little patio at my house, see what I can grow. That's actually edible.
You can do that out of pots and, buckets and.
Well, what's the easiest thing to start with? Like if you're a beginner, you know nothing about anything green, but you want to try, the enthusiasm is there. What would you suggest people start with?
Leafy stuff, greens, lettuce,
Leafy stuff? Okay.
green and lettuce, stuff like that, kale. Those things,
They're easy to grow.
they're easy to grow. I mean, you can't, you can't,
You can't mess
mess
those
that
up.
up too
Okay.
much.
That's encouraging because I like those things too. So I may have to try those and
Yeah,
report back to you.
If you mess those up, that means like you were not paying attention.
If my kale comes out yellow, then
you
it's
missed
like,
something.
it just wasn't for me. That wasn't my
Right.
lane. Thank you for that. Food is essential, but the option to grow your own food is not a given in every community. Systemic factors such as land ownership, wealth, and location all play a role in healthy food options for people of color, which can then lead to health issues that can last for generations, proving why race matters when it comes to our food. To learn more, go to pbswisconsin.org/whyRaceMatters to find additional links and resources to help keep you informed. There, you can also check out the Why Race Matters podcast, as well as additional episodes.
Funding for Why Race Matters is provided by CUNA Mutual Group, Park Bank, Alliant Energy, Madison Museum of Contemporary Art, Focus Fund for Wisconsin Programming, and Friends of PBS Wisconsin.